I basically grew up in a grocery store located outside of New Paltz in a little four-corner area called Ohioville. My father sold meat and vegetables and canned goods. My mother was a school teacher. By then, she was mostly taking care of my brothers and I. Back in the 50s, people told stories. And they told very vivid stories. The stories were, they were loaded with visuals. When I listened to those people tell those stories, I could see them. And the stories, they varied. There was always some kind of a dramatic event taking place, a storm. The apples were going to freeze this year. And these stories would be told to my dad in the back of the store. And as a kid, I would just listen in. And I think I became fascinated in part by their stories. Their stories sort of provided a sense of time to me, a sense of history to me. In addition to that, I grew up in New Paltz, and New Paltz has a street of stone houses from the early 18th century. You couldn't live there without being aware of a time before the time when I was a kid. I can remember those magical evenings when we would be driving back from Poughkeepsie to our house, and there was a place after you crossed the Mid-Hudson Bridge when you were kind of heading up this long incline before you reached Highland. And I so distinctly remember looking out at the river and being mesmerized by the lights of the city reflecting in the river. And it was one of those visual experiences that I think it's so etched into my memory that there are times when I'm painting, when I'm thinking about that, and maybe I have this desire to somehow recreate it again or re-experience it again. Some people have said to me, you consider yourself a maritime painter, a marine artist, and yet you live so far from the ocean. The marine experience, the maritime experience, doesn't just have to do with blue water. There's also a brown water experience. And for me, it was the Hudson River. I can't even count the number of times that I've crossed the Hudson River in my life. It's got to be in the tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of times. We do that. We live in Rensselaer County. We drive to Albany a couple times a week. So all those crossings, and I never cross the river without being aware of it, without looking at it and being fascinated by it and its many moods. I'm fascinated by the watercraft that I experienced, that I saw in my lifetime. And I think that has fostered an interest in what kind of vessels were on that water traveling all those centuries ago. What were they? What did the Indians use? What did the Dutch build? What did the English build? What happened during the American Revolution? All the way up to our time. There's still so much activity and so much variety. I've never lost interest in that. And I do feel that that waterway is my waterway. That's the waterway that I feel connected to. And that's the waterway that I hope I honor in some way with my work. Like that famous cartoon that was created by R. Crumb, I want to avert that disastrous conclusion that we spoil everything. And so maybe some of these paintings are the beginning of a direction that has kind of led down the road of polluting the whole planet. I know they have a nostalgic appeal, but there's also enough of the real world, I think, in many of them to give a sense of it was a little better this way. It was a little better when it was slower. It was a little better when it was quieter. It was a little better when there was less smoke and a little bit more respect for where people lived. And there isn't any, I mean, the greatest example of that would be to go way back and look at how the Iroquois, how the various tribes of the Iroquois nation lived, or how the Algonquian people lived in New York. How did they live in this environment? What did they think about where they lived? There are so many lessons that come from a people that have respect for and know how to live in nature. My work is always going to be about New York State history. That's what I do. But how I feel in terms of being a citizen here in New York State is that I have always been a great believer in zoned land use. You make certain decisions about how you're going to use this resource or how you're going to use that resource, and you stick with it. You don't change it. I see a better land use in other parts of the world. They don't seem to deal with a sprawl that takes place here. We have almost an environmental free-for-all going on, where anything can be done with anything. And, well, the results are obvious in many places. The exhibition at the Albany Institute of History and Art that was titled A Sense of Time was a wonderful opportunity for me to put the work together in the organization in a chronological order, because that's what that work was intended to do. It was intended to tell a story of the evolution of New York State, how it became what it is today, how it started as a pristine landscape with native people who knew how to live in the environment with the resources that were available to them, how that transitioned when Europeans arrived, and then how development continued and technology affected the environment. So that story is an important story. The overriding intent that I had in mind 40 years ago when I started making all these pictures was, would it be possible to create a body of work that made people appreciate where they lived more and maybe take a little bit better care of it, or think about it a little bit more before decisions were made that had catastrophic effects?